Hey, hello and welcome. And thank you everybody for spending your afternoon or your lunch break with us. Just a couple words before I turn over to the speaker. On Zoom, this session, as I mentioned, is being recorded and it is designed to be interactive. As you have questions, please use chat to ask your question. I'll be the moderator, and at the right time, I'll stop Ms. Gibson and prompt her with the question. Of course, you could also hold your questions until the end. So I think everybody's quite familiar with Zoom, and you could use that chat function. Next slide. Thank you. And next slide. That's just for recording because we are a PMI authorized training partner, and that slide has a lot of disclaimers that should be in the front of every video. So welcome to today's session. Our focus is on diversity, equity, and inclusion and how it applies in project management. We have the pleasure of having Ms. Gibson really putting together this wonderful presentation that we've been working on for some time. And let me introduce you to Ms. Gibson. Next slide, please. Renika Gibson, she is a certified PMP, as you can see, and she is also a specialist in the DEI space. As I'm sure a lot of us know, that DEI has been gaining quite a bit of attention in the general world of human resources, but not in particular in project management. And we found that to be a significant gap. So working with Ms. Gibson, who has over 16 years of corporate learning training, she's certified in PMP, so project management. We found that, let's work together and put together a presentation to at least present our understanding, our view, our stories that we could share with the general project management professional world. So that's what we have. As we go through the presentation, as I mentioned, please raise your hand, ask questions, use chat. That's probably a little bit less intrusive. That's probably the best. And if you do need to speak, I think all of you have the capability to unmute, but if you're not speaking, please do mute them just for the silence for everybody else. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Ms. Gibson.
Thank you, Dr. Wu. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. So yes, my name is Renika Gibson. And like Dr. Wu said, we came together on a project and we started talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion in the project management lifecycle. And I was just saying to him, I think the only time you really hear about it is during the procurement piece when you're talking about the vendors and your resources. But where are the other opportunities when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion during the project lifecycle? So you think about your risk management, or even in some of your retrospective or your lessons learned area, there's a few other places that we would like to address that. So we're going to jump into that today. But we wanted to start with our PMI Institute, the Project Management Institute stance on how they approach diversity, equity, and inclusion. So as a global leader enabling individuals to create positive impact through projects, PMI has championed a diverse, inclusive, and equitable community, and they serve millions of stakeholders and staff. So I think one of the most diverse groups is the PMP space of folks. So many project managers are across the world are of different races. This community is one of the biggest diverse communities I've ever experienced. So I know that this topic is going to be valuable for all of us on the call today. So let's just jump into the topic. And again, I hope you got a chance to just see that entire scope of definition that PMI focuses on within their organization. So today we're going to talk about some essentials. So the essentials we're talking about are what are some of those key pieces of information that really help us to think about our just day-to-day perspective on DEI. And then what we're going to do is combine that with our project management lifecycle. And then we're just going to talk about a few do's and don'ts and best practices. So let's go ahead and get started with the essentials. So this presentation is thought-provoking and provocative. So we're just brushing, we're not brushing aside any real concerns. We're actually talking about these real concerns and situations. But what I will say is that this session is the hors d'oeuvres of this topic. We are just getting started. So you can imagine we're just going to scrape the surface today, but we could go even further as we talk about the different phases of project management. But I just want to get the conversation started. That was our goal today. So open your minds and let's get into it. So the PMO advisory has a stance as well on recalling and believing that education and function backgrounds is also a part of those diversity consideration. But when we look at the definition, I've highlighted the 3 top things when we talk about DEI. That's representation, compensation, and opportunity. And in most cases, those are the times in which we are concerned that they're not being addressed when it comes to equality, especially in the workplace and in vendor selection and things of that nature. So let's just be mindful of these different spaces and these different opportunities for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I do want to pause for a minute also, because if you have been in this space and have heard the conversation around DEI, you probably heard the quote from Verna Myers. And her quote is, "Diversity is being invited to the party while inclusion is being asked to dance." Now, when I think about equity, I took it to the next level and I said, so what if she says diversity is the party invitation and inclusion is the dance part, then maybe equity is being asked to help plan and invest in the party and getting a cut of the funds that come from the party. Comes from the party fee profits. So taking that quote to the next level is being a part of that planning, right? Being a part of the stake in the return and investment of that planning of that party. So I just want to throw that in there. I hope that, helps to get some of your juices flowing when it comes to the DEI perspective. So moving on, we're going to be focusing on stereotypes. So again, going back to the point of essentials, when it comes to DEI essentials, this is where you really start to break down what are you currently internalizing that could be impacting your DEI perspective when it comes to your project management space. So these are just 3 of the high level subject matters that we chose to pick because these are the common ones, especially the identity piece. We're in a time in our culture right now and in our space and in the world where identity is hot topic. It is a very hot topic because of our world opening up to those various ways of addressing folks and how people are now identifying. So being sensitive and being aware of those changes is very important. When we take a look here, we captured a few stereotypes that are common across the world. As you can see here, things like women can be too emotional to be leaders. Again, I don't want to step on any toes or be offensive, but think about presidency. Women being a president, not quite ready for that yet. We live in a world where we're not quite ready. Another one that is very sensitive could be men in leadership may abuse their power. That's another stereotype. It's not a fact, but people like to assume that that is the case. Looking into professional development, let's take a look at our lack of knowledge. So if you don't have a degree, you don't have the knowledge to be successful. Not true at all. I know several people, especially in the energy space, where they learned the skill first and then went and got their educational degrees to support their skills. And that's just as invaluable as going to school first and then getting the skills. And the years in service is most of the time just as equivalent to the goal of the employment. So you can literally work 25 years and that's probably equivalent to about a 4-year degree. And again, not trying to take away of the debt that most of us get into by going to school, but again, it does not take away from the person's knowledge. Lastly, I do want to call out that there are generational differences, and some folks may use individuals' age or generational group to try to define their work ethic, and that is not fair also. So we should just be mindful of these different stereotypes and not feed into them. And lastly, just to talk about identity again, a stereotype could be thinking that a person's identity should not be expressed in the workplace, whether that's sexual orientation or who they identify as. Those things are still to be respected. They're not a distraction, but they must be respected in the workplace irregardless. So I want to pause for a minute and just make sure we don't have any questions in the chat. And yeah, do we have any thoughts so far? Awesome.
I'll just jump in and add that stereotypes also often prevent us from applying our best judgments. So one of the things I found in my work experience is try to come in with a clean and open mind into every project, into every client. I'm a university teacher working with different students. And the minute you have a stereotype, it becomes a hindrance to try to get to a better understanding. So that's only observation I'll add.
Thank you, Dr. Wu. So another essential concept is bias. So when you're thinking about your personal thoughts and opinions, we think about your biases. So we all have them, and it normally comes from how we were raised, the things that we've experienced in our lives. Our lens is what is what we've experienced that really does shape our biases. Ms. Thacker, she has done quite a few discussions on bias, and she says that bias occurs because we are all hardwired to automatically judge things about every single person that we meet. And she has some really cool discoveries. So I wanted to share with you some of the things that she instantly or she discovered when we're talking about biases. So every 7 seconds, you have the ability to make, guess how many judgments about somebody? 11. So apparently you automatically, when you meet someone or you see someone, you're making judgments about that individual. It could be for gender, race, age, which also equates to their wealth or their educational status or their social status. So there's other things that have unconscious bias as well whenever you meet someone, and it's including their clothing, hairstyle, the body language, what they're driving or their mode of transportation, a handbag. That's definitely a social status thing when it comes to women. We are guilty of, if we see a luxury bag versus if we just see, a simple non-name brand crossbody. We tend to put people in different social statuses by the things that we see. And we have to check that often, going back to Dr. Wu's comment, because we need to be cognizant of how we engage with individuals based off of the biases that we automatically are we're putting together in our head, if you will. And just stop and think for a moment. Have you ever been accused of being biased or experienced bias yourself? Does any of these resonate with you whenever you meet someone? Are you automatically judging them by their age, their gender, or their race? Are you judging them based off of how they're dressed, or maybe what they look like, what their outfit looks like? We have to be very cognizant of when we have these bias situations, because making these harmful assumptions about a person, especially before engaging, is detrimental to project managers. The pursuit is to a diverse, dynamic, and result-driven team. So the best thing we can do is to understand folks instead of not understanding them, because typically it's just fear of understanding, and we should never be afraid to gain that understanding of individuals. So being intentional about DEI prevents so much risk from happening for various reasons, and we're going to jump into that in just a second. So for now, moving on to bias, we're also going to go into emotional intelligence. So the University of Florida Muma College was very intentional about sharing content about the competencies of emotional intelligence. I like to say that emotional intelligence is simply just being self-aware, or just being aware in general of your surroundings and yourself. It is also considering the fact that you need to be aware and control of your emotions. But also, I like to simply say that it's read the room. Like, have you ever heard the quote, just read the room? Sometimes we need to slow down and just consider what's going on around us and the people that we are engaging with. So when we take a look here, self-awareness, you can do SWOT analysis. There's so many different surveys and questionnaires out there and personality tests that you can take to find out if you're an introvert or an extrovert, if you're I don't even remember the letters anymore, but I'm sure some of you remember what I'm talking about. And we tend to shift as we age in our different personality types. I know I have. But taking those personality questionnaires and assessments really do help you become very self-aware, even of the things that you may not like about yourself and the things that are strengths of yourself. I know for me, I love to talk. And when I'm learning and meeting new people, I tend to word vomit. And but I'm very cognizant of that. So what I do is I constantly remind myself, like, okay, give someone else a chance to discuss or chat or talk to you. Otherwise, how are you getting to know them? So having that self-awareness really does improve your engagement with others and allow you to be considerate when getting to know and learning about and from others. Also, social awareness is very important whenever you're trying to engage with others, especially in groups, or whenever you're talking about your vendors, when you're looking for resources. Understanding the social awarenesses of others is very important. And then the ability to manage social settings, especially from a team management perspective, that is very important. So your emotional intelligence has a way to impact how the dynamic of your actual project team. So that is why it is so important for you to be emotionally intelligent, read the room, and your self-awareness. And that is key to managing a great project. Is there anyone else that has anything about our different components of emotional intelligence, biases, or stereotypes before we move into our next topic? Any comments or discussions that we may have? All right, so I'm hearing none, so we'll move forward. So what I do want to do is I want to talk about a case where project management is involved. And this is about the Richmond, Virginia versus J.A. Croson case. This is a prime example of diversity, equity, and inclusion attempting to be addressed in the best way possible. But unfortunately, it didn't meet the mark. So essentially, if you've all heard, there is a minority business enterprise that exists till today, where you have a subset group that meets over 51% of the organization is ran by a minority or a minority group. So that qualifies for your minority business enterprises. So Richmond, Virginia had an opportunity way before 1983, but 1983 was the year that they chose to try to address the issue with their city construction contracts. So basically, with them implementing this minority business utilization plan, which required 30% of the contracts to be awarded to your minority business enterprise group, it took away a contract from J.A. Croson. And there was a major case. And the conclusion was actually that the minority utilization plan was not appropriate for this particular fix. So it was essentially putting a Band-Aid over a larger wound that needed way more care than just that. And we see this a lot of times, and I'll give you the example in general, because I don't want to call out any specific company, but oftentimes when there is some type of lack of diversity in a company's experience and it goes public, what happens is training. That's the first thing they go to, is training. But truthfully speaking, you can't train someone not to be biased. You can't train someone not to stereotype or to discriminate. You really have to tap into the core of that individual and start to address and enforce change and consequences for them being allowed to practice discrimination or bias in the organization. So in this particular case, the courts decided that this was too general of a plan for such a major issue. You can't, this is not, it was too blanket of a resolution, and it did not have enough details and nuances built into it to address the issue at hand. And from further research, Richmond, Virginia didn't even have enough contracts to even meet the 30% quota. They would have had to tap resources from California to get minority contractors, because think about it, the minorities were probably deterred for years to even be city contractors or to even pursue that as a career. So imagine there may not have been any construction contractors that were minorities to meet that goal. So essentially, J.A. Croson won the case. And I know I'm only speaking very high level about this case, but I do encourage you all to read about it and see how that went, because it impacts all the projects in that area in Richmond, Virginia. And it was quite interesting to see the back and forth and the dialogue between the city officers, and also the court's decision. So again, the main reason why I was really lured to this particular case for this subject matter was to say that this is a great effort that they tried to put this plan in place, but we do have to dig a little deeper when we're talking about addressing an issue that has systematically impacted people for over 100 years. You can't fix that with a clause. You do need to address it. You have to change the mindset and the behavior, and then you have to create that seat at the table so people even know that now this change is in place. So I think that we have more work to do than just adding a statement to a clause or a plan or things of that nature. There's a lot of work that we need to do, and we're doing it now. Even with this conversation, just talking about it now is a start. So now we're going to get into more of our project management piece and how we can start to combine our project management knowledge into our diversity and inclusion as well, and combining these two together. So again, we're going to take a look at various components of the 12 domains of project management. As you can see here, we have these knowledge domains listed out in different ways, but some of the ones that we're really going to focus on today is going to be your resources, it's going to be your conflict management. We're going to talk about procurement, of course, vendor selection, again, communication, and then your team dynamics and management. But one thing I did want to also point out is that if you're looking for any content around governance or conflict, you can check out Dr. Wu's Optimizing Project Management. It's available on Amazon, and it aims to provide an optimized view of project management by balancing and blending competing methodologies between like traditional versus agile. So check that book out. But today we're going to continue to talk about where do we begin in diversity, equity, and inclusion when we talk about the domains of project management. Now, my initial response is from the beginning. So the moment a project has been bidded on and assigned and you are working on that project, we are starting our diversity, equity, and inclusion within that life cycle. So let's take a look here. If we start from left to right, then we're looking at initiation and planning. So when we're talking initiation and planning, again, that's your procurement. That's where you're looking for your resources and your vendors. So a few things to consider is your cultural awareness. So there's this series of books out there, and it's called Kiss, Bow, or Shake Hands, and it's by Terry Morrison and Wayne A. Conway. And they have a great series of books across the countries, across the different countries. So you have Mexico, you have Asia, you have all these different locations, not just countries, but you have all these different locations, and they call out the cultural differences, their gift best practices around like gifting, some of their body language or cultural body language practices. For instance, I went to India in 2012, if I'm not mistaken. I think it was 2012. I went to India, and one of the first things I noticed is that whenever I'm engaging, when I was engaging with my peers, it was there. The yes was side to side. The nod, it was side to side. And no, I'm used to it being up and down, yes, but along with their okay is TK. I noticed that was a cultural difference, and I was like, oh, okay. And I started to communicate with them while I was there for 2 months. So I found myself doing the same thing. Like whenever we were saying yes or okay, I would do side to side like TK. So that's a cultural thing, or in that body language that you pick up on, and you realize like, okay, no one's confused. So this doesn't mean confusion. This doesn't mean I see. I think in Mexico it's like maybe not, but in India it was TK, like yes, okay, I got it. Another thing is in Mexico, if you put your hands on your hips, you're about to assert something. Now that can be true as well, and at least in my culture, in my household, if my mom placed her hands on her hips, she meant what she said, and that's the same gesture of assertiveness in Mexico as well. So I wanted to mention that book because it does cover a lot of cultures, and it gives you some of those cultural differences that would really help you whenever you're engaging with the different locations. So again, being mindful of those cultural awarenesses is very important. Also, going back to our essentials, check your bias whenever you're securing your talent and your team members. So you may think that because a person is younger, they may not be able to provide you with insight on your project. But if you're on like a technology project, let's be clear, the younger professionals probably are more proficient in the technology, especially when it comes to the different offerings and the different tools and resources that are out there. So it would be best to tap into that demographic or those resources for those reasons. reason. So being mindful of the strengths of your different talent is very important, and not use those biases to say, oh, maybe this person can't do it. Give them the chance to prove themselves, because most of the time when it comes to DEI, the folks who are disenfranchised typically are saying, I never got the opportunity. So giving individuals the opportunity is very important. And again, around the recruitment and attention, it ties right into that. So when you're looking at that talent and the results that they have, then you can secure and recruit the right folks to be on your team. So be mindful of that. And I'm going to move on, but again, let me know if anyone has any comments or anything they would like to chime in, because again, we're just scraping the surface on these subject matters. We can go much deeper, but we just wanted to give you guys some hors d'oeuvres around this topic. So going to your stakeholder analysis, it is very important to be sensitive to the way you capture that information and how you are measuring and analyzing your stakeholders. Another thing that people may not be mindful of is when you're compiling that data, be mindful of what you comment and how you comment and capture that information for your analysis. You may have to share that spreadsheet or that description of your stakeholders across different folks on your team. And it may be offensive if you're saying a person is difficult to work with, when it could be simply a cultural difference. You may not even, your body language and your expressions may be different. I know it varies from men to women. And there's other, I can say, like, even as me being a person of color, my expressions may be different, but also because of my upbringing, I tend to, my voice, is the way I speak is a little different. So being mindful of those things whenever you are capturing your analysis for your stakeholders is very important, because you never know when those documents may end up in someone else's hands. And I have had that experience where I reviewed some analysis documentation, and I was just like, oh, there was some very sensitive commentary about certain groups, in mostly around like leadership, or is where my experience was. And it was just like, okay, so I did handle with care whenever I engaged with those individuals, but I did find that it was a little insensitive of some of the descriptions during the stakeholder analysis that I saw. So be mindful of those things whenever you're capturing documentation and putting a profile, if you will, for your stakeholders. And again, jumping to risk management is another phase in the life cycle where it's more so inclusion than anything. As a project manager, yes, you are responsible for capturing that data, defining those risks, but you also have an entire team around you that is helping to execute on that project. Get everyone involved in identifying and defining what those risks are, because depending on their support or depending on what their role is on your project, they have a different perspective than you. Your perspective is the full scope, while everyone else has specific focuses that they can give you that insight. So ensure that you're being inclusive in getting that feedback around your defining and mitigating your risk, because that would definitely save you a lot of time and reduce your risk if you get all the input that you can from your team. Speaking of team, we're going to jump into the execution side on the right. Managing teams are very important whenever you're within a project, when you're managing a project. To me, it's the hardest part when you're having to manage individuals. So going back to our essentials and being able to read the room and to be emotionally intelligent, understanding how individuals work is key to working together. Everyone, we know as adults, everyone doesn't have to like each other. We do have to respect each other to work together. But when you understand the folks that you're working with or the team that you have, and you realize that some people may not work well together, you want to be cognizant of that, and you want to be creative in how you approach in with them engaging, if you will. Another thing to consider when we talk about being diverse in our team is the characteristics of professions. The two that come to mind for me are engineers. I've worked with engineers most of my career, and they seem to be heads down unless they have something valuable to add in comments. Otherwise, they like to be heads down doing their work. They don't mind talking about their work, but they don't like wasting time on non-value conversations. And that's just my experience, of course. And then you have like your construction staff. Most construction employees are individual leaders in their own right because they're very hands-on and they are realistic about their task. So they don't like fluff. They want you to get straight to the point, and they want to get the job done. So understanding your individual characteristics in your profession really does help you. Again, we're not trying to stereotype anyone, but we want to respect people where they are and how they operate so that we can make sure that we're having the best collaboration. Lastly, when it comes to managing a team, is remembering the locations. Like I said, when I worked with in India, before I even got there, we had to do so much planning for over a year. But I had to be cognizant of the fact that they were in a different time zone. And so there were times when I adjusted my schedule and I signed on late at night because it was better for their time scheduling and their planning. And I had to be considerate of that because we're a team and sometimes you need to adjust. And then on top of that, making sure that we're giving them opportunities to engage in various ways. For instance, on this webinar, many people may not want to speak up about whenever they have a question. They may want to place that question in the chat. Respecting that allows us to allow people to be who they are and feel comfortable in their space to contribute. I'm a person that if I'm challenged with an issue, I need some time to think about it. I may not be able to give you an immediate response. Sometimes I can if we're really in the thrust of that conversation, but there may be times where I need to reflect before I can give a sound response. So knowing your team and this sounds very simple in essence, right? But combining all these things together allows you to open your mind up to a diverse team and make sure that you're being equal when approaching the various team members and their different skill sets. Next, managing change is very important. Of course, we all know that in project management, change is inevitable. Nothing's is going to go as planned. And with that, you have to go back to your essential emotional intelligence and being mindful that you are the glue that's holding this entire project together. The way you handle change is going to impact everyone else. How does that play into diversity, equity, and inclusion? Well, for one, you have to be sure that you are being resilient with managing the change and putting out the right expectation to your team members, and also going back to all the subjects about managing the team, being mindful of how folks like to take in information. Some people may need it written out in an email, which you should do to capture that information, but some people may need to have a verbal discussion. So whenever you're communicating that change, you have to be diverse in the way that you approach those changes, but you also have to be calm about it. You have to manage that emotion. Otherwise, everything's a fire. And while it is in project management, everything can be a fire. We still have to be resilient in how we go about handling that change. So again, and of course, because budget is the number one issue or the number one focus. We want to stay within that cost, right? So we're doing that is we have to keep a level head and make sure that we're working well with our team to do so. Lastly, going to close, we're talking about the lessons learned. So when we talk about lessons learned, just like with the risk management piece, get everyone's input. You want to be very inclusive about your lessons learned, because whenever you look at that list, you want to make sure that you've covered every area or team within your project, because you don't have every perspective. So you have that full scope again, but you want to get the team to give you feedback on the lessons learned. It should be a team input. Another agile, if you're familiar with the agile methodology, a really good ceremony within agile is a retrospective. If you really want to be inclusive and hear your team out, especially if you guys are going from maybe mini project to mini, if you have like sub projects within a project, it is really good to do a retrospective at the end of your sub projects, because you can hear the team's perspective, and sometimes they may have something that can change the entire game of your project. It could speed up the deadlines. It could save you money. Doing retrospectives at the end of even your deliverables, if you break your project out in deliverables, doing a retrospective after each deliverable can change and improve the execution of your project. So these are just some high level DEI considerations whenever you're in the project management lifecycle of your managing your project. I want to stop here because we're going to just get into some do's and don'ts and some best practices and wrap up this session. Is there anything that has brought a question up or brought any thoughts up or discussion from this particular slide?
So there is no question in the chat box.
Okay.
But I want to see if you can just spend maybe a minute to see if you have any experience that you see or examples in which you feel that the principles of DEI were violated in your project experience.
That's a good question. Ooh.
Sorry to put you on the spot.
It's okay. It's okay. I mean, in general, and I've worked, project space has been where most of my career has been. Most of the time, if I've been brought on within the organization or even moving about within a particular company that I work for, it's been in the project space. And the most common thing that I see is opportunity. And I'm sure everyone has heard this, but people get opportunities and chances to work on projects based on who they know, not what they know. And sometimes it's helpful and it's beneficial because the who they know may be because they know that person is reliable and that person has proven themselves to have a skill. But there has been situations where I've seen a who you know be selected versus a what they know, because, and that's just it. The person maybe has never worked in that capacity, but because they knew the powers that be, they were able to get a important position within a project. And I have also seen it not work out well and delayed our projects because we pulled someone in because of who they know and not because of what they know.
That's a very, very good example. I think we see a lot of the decisions based not so much on competencies,
right,
but based on familiarity.
Right.
And so thank you for sharing that.
Sure. So next, we're just going to cover a few do's and don'ts as you engage with your team and you navigate through your projects. So again, on the left are your do's. As you can see, the arrow, the green arrow is pointing to the left, and then your don'ts are to the right. I really don't feel like this list is some profound list, to be honest with you. This is reminders. You want to be genuine in your desire for diversity. Again, I think one of the most important things is to remember that the more opportunities for a diverse space, the more perspective that you will have, which means that you have the ability to produce very much so innovative and timely in current project work in deliverables, if you will. I'm thinking about examples. If we think about some examples here, think about being in a construction situation and not having someone who are aware of disabilities. Something as simple as a wheelchair ramp. If you're not thinking about that group, you're not going to address those group needs. And these things are evolving all the time. One of the things that I've experienced in a project was user interface being sensitive to colorblind individuals. And it literally happened in the middle of a project. We were building an interface for grid monitorization. And one of the engineers that they hired was colorblind. So whenever they were going to engage with the interface, they couldn't because it wasn't colorblind sensitive, and everything is color coded to signify. It was a symbology for the different phases of energy on the interface. And so we had to go back to the drawing board and incorporate colorblind sensitivity to the project. So again, you have to be very intentional about being diverse in your team when it comes to project. You want a team that's going to consider things that you probably you're not even aware of or thinking about. Having people with different perspectives is only going to strengthen your ability to provide the most valuable and quality project outcome possible. So I just want to encourage you all to be very diverse in your thought process. And again, I think the one thing you want to do is bury any concern or apprehension or fear about learning about others, especially from a cultural perspective. I think that's the biggest opportunity as well, is folks are afraid to say, you know what, I just don't understand that culture, so I don't really want to go there because I might offend. I literally guys just had an accident. A peer just joined the organization, and I was trying to ask them what organization they just left to join our organization, but I didn't ask in that way. What I asked was, where are you from? And and they were just like, well, I was born in the US. And I was just like, no, I'm sorry. What I meant to say was, and I had to correct myself. Again, that could have been very offensive to that person. But what I did was I apologized and I said, I did not mean to ask you that question in that way. What I wanted to know is where did you work before you worked here? And they were like, oh, okay, got it. So it's okay to practice and exercise your diversity skills every day, as long as you're willing to take ownership for your actions. But it's only going to make you stronger. And I don't have all the answers, but what we have done here is just capture some really good advice to get started with your approach. So being open-minded, again, being cognizant of jokes. Again, in male-dominated fields, I've experienced it. Again, I worked in energy, and it can get a little uncomfortable if people are not cognizant of the things that they say whenever you're in certain groups. And again, regardless of your project, you always want to remain professional, but you can also be relaxed as well. And I know that the last two bullets on the left can be a little tricky because it's like, okay, we don't want to joke, but we want to be relaxed. We want to be professional. You do want to juggle those things, but you want to find that right happy medium so that you can still be yourself, but also be open-minded to learning from others. And again, on the left, on the right, you don't want to exclude people from throughout your project life cycle. You want to ensure that your team is incorporated and they have investment. So that way, you're not the only person feeling the weight of the success of the project. Your entire team should have an investment for that project to be successful. Again, you never want to assume that you know what's going on with the team member or with your team in general. You want to seek understanding, because the stronger your team is, the better they will perform. And of course, never judge a book by its cover. That's a cliche, but it is spot on. You want to get to know someone. Just because someone has a tattoo sleeve does not mean that they're, like a really bad person that, is assassinate, they do mean things and late at night. A tattoo is a tattoo, is self-expression. So being mindful of things of that nature really does help you to be more open to a diverse team. And then lastly is our good practices to have. So depending on your project type, your location, all your demographics, do your research. And it goes back to the Kiss, Bow, or Shake Hands book that I referenced earlier. There's resources out there for you to understand the industries, the demographics, the locations that you will be supporting, especially if you're on projects when it comes to communities that's going to be utilizing what you're delivering. That's very important. Think about the community in which is going to be utilizing the tools or resources from your project. Always consider that community. That is the best way to continue to think about diversity and inclusion when it comes to your project, is to think about those, the consumers of the project that you're working on. And of course, think first. 1, 2, and 3, I just covered those. Keep your project goal in mind. We do have to stay within a budget. We know a scope, schedule, cost. That's the biggest thing when it comes to a project. We don't want to lose sight of that. But again, it does not take away all of the effort it takes to remember to consider being DEI driven throughout our project. Setting clear expectations definitely reduces confusion to anyone in the project space. Of course, remember to be sensitive to your team dynamics. And again, encourage ideas. The best team that I've had is where folks were able to give me feedback and recommendations, and sometimes constructive criticisms on where we could improve as a team. And while sometimes it stings because you may think you're doing everything right, but to have a team that is willing to speak up and you allow them to have that space to express where improvement could be really does change the game of your project. Because again, you could be pulled from because of other motivations to be pulled in different directions. Again, most project managers are focused on that cost and making sure that they're staying within scope whenever there's other impacts that could be influencing those things. If you're not getting that feedback from your teams, that's detrimental to the success of your project. So make sure that you're doing that collaboration and being very inclusive in your strategy for any type of resolution of risk or conflict. So this is the end. Our last slide here in summary is my take on it is diversity, equity, inclusion is not a one-off training. It's an ongoing effort to be adopted early on in the PM life cycle. So again, I want to thank you all for your time. We have a few minutes left. Dr. Wu, I'll send it back to you.
Thank you so much. The video is refreshing, I guess. So thank you everybody for joining. Are there any questions that you have right now?
I think it's a nice presentation. This is Vishwa, and you covered up most of the points what project managers used to face during these phases, right? Like when we are interacting with people like across the team, across the time zones, across the geographies, the project managers are going to be all the more difficult. Nowadays it is most common, right? Nowadays it is across all the projects we are facing these things and we are experiencing. So nowadays it is also becoming earlier it used to be globalization. After that it became localization. Now it's borders are no more a border for anything, right? So so the teams are there from across the boards, across the countries, and we need to keep in mind all these points what you have rightly mentioned. And project manager should be cognizant of doing all these things, practicing all of them.
Yeah.
And some of them, what happens is that, as you rightly said, some of the biases that we carry, right? With that, people also will try to assume that there would be some risk associated with that biased approach of like evaluating a person or a personality, right? So we never know. So that's where I think it's understanding different cultures. It should be a part of the project management guide itself, so that it's practiced by all the PMs.
I agree.
Yeah.
I was on a project and we had people in various locations, and and I wasn't the project manager. I was just serving as a training capacity, but we did a talent show. We did a virtual talent show, and we encourage people from across the different regions and locations to express based on like their cultural talents. And it was awesome. Like, and we got to tap into people's personal interest, and we were more connected after that talent show than ever, because we were able to see things that we were interested in that others were interested in. Like, I'm a podcast buff. Do you know how many folks actually like enjoy podcasts and was like showcasing their podcasts that they host on their free time? And I was like, I didn't even know you did that. So having those type of experience really do expose you to people, and you connect in different ways. Food is my number one way to connect, by the way. So I love breaking bread with folks. Whenever you go and eat with them is a great way to connect with them. But to your point, it's a challenge we all have to continue to. I see you, Dr. Wu.
So thank you so much. I'm sensitive to people's time, and we have 3 minutes left.
Okay.
So first of all, we having a what we call mini study. It's really a 5, maybe 7-minute survey, and we already received actually some fairly fabulous responses. There are about 17 responses, actually more than that as of today. But just to show you that these are some of the questions we ask, and we're already getting some early data. Questions like, do you feel DEI is a project manager's responsibility? And you could see that 71% of the respondents says yes, while nobody said no. Good news.
Yeah.
29 said not sure. So I just want to show you that these are some of the studies we're doing. And as we get more data, we'll organize the next webinar to continue the conversation. So I hope everybody could have a chance to scan this and also participate in the survey. Very quickly, I do know that we only have 2 minutes left. As a PMI authorized training partner, most things we do earns PDU, and this is no different. So what we'd like to do is, if you can scan this QR code or you see the link here, give us your feedback on the session, the good, the bad. We love to continuously improve. And we'll send you an email with the PDU claim code, so you could claim 1 PDU. You could download the presentation. We'll send you a link. So if you want to have that, you will have additional link to the mini study that I show, and as well as the link to the article, which some of you probably have seen, because that's where we did most of the advertisement for this webinar. We have 2 minutes left. So are there any final words?
Thank you guys for allowing me to present. So that is my final word. Thank you.
I see one of the comments from Jolie. Thank you so much. Yes, we like to make project management work. PMO advisory, whether it is our training, our consulting, is not about ivory tower. It's not necessarily about idealizing the situation. We hit tough issues, and we admit we don't have answers. We admit we are a work in progress, right? All of us are. But I think by being honest and by talking about and thinking about and having all of you participate, we are likely to get to a better place. And that's what we hope to do.
Yeah.
Okay. So thank you so much, everybody, for your wonderful questions and your time. I'm going to stop the recording. I will stay on for another couple minutes should there be questions. So I'm going to stop the recording now, and also stop the sharing soon. So thank you, everybody. And again, have a wonderful day.
Thank you.